Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Now, combined arms warfare, simply put, is the cooperation and even combination of different military units such as cavalry, infantry, artillery in a military operation. Today, this can be even more complex with the development of mechanized infantry and air power. The basic idea behind combined arms warfare is that different arms and weapon systems must be used in concert to maximize the survival and combat effectiveness of each other. The strengths of one system must be used to compensate for the weaknesses of others. Now, in conquering an empire that stretched from the Sea of Japan to the Mediterranean Sea, the typical image of the Mongols is a literal horde of leather-clad warriors sweeping across the steppes, bringing death and destruction. The sources from the period of the Mongol Army describe their conquests with an apocalyptic anxiety. For instance, we have Ibn al-Athir, who wrote his chronicle from the safety of Mosul in northern Iraq. According to him, and I quote, "For several years I continued to avoid mention of this disaster as it horrified me, and I was unwilling to recount it. I was taking one step towards it and then another back. Who is there who would find it easy to write the obituary of Islam and the Muslims? For whom would it be a trifling matter to give an account of this? Oh, would that my mother had not given me birth. Oh, would that I had died before it occurred and had been a thing forgotten, quite forgotten. If anyone were to say that since God, glory and power be his, created Adam until the present time, mankind has not had a comparable affliction, he would be speaking the truth. History books do not contain anything similar or anything that comes close to it." I felt the same way when I saw an episode of The Kardashians. As you can see, Ibn al-Athir has a flair for the melodramatic, but he isn't finished yet. And he goes on, "As for the Antichrist, he will spare those who follow him and destroy those who oppose him. But these did not spare anyone. On the contrary, they slew women, men, and children. They split open the bellies of pregnant women and killed the fetuses. In about a year, these men conquered most of the known earth, its fairest part and the most civilized and populated, and of its inhabitants the most equitable in manners and conduct. In the lands they did not reach, there was nobody who was not in fearful expectation of them, watching for their arrival." Excuse me. The sense of fear and dread is palpable. The Mongols were unknown, little understood, and viewed more as a supernatural power or force of nature than men. Modern popular writers have done little to dissipate the aura of shock and all that accompanied the Mongol armies. Indeed, the Mongol armies are referred to as a storm from the east, the hurricane from Mongolia, and so forth. These comparisons transform the Mongols into a force of nature are based on the destruction left in their wake. Yet for all the hyperbole, we should not diminish the ability or the destruction of the Mongol military machine. There's never been an army so feared, nor one that's lived up to its reputation. Certainly other steppe armies existed. The Huns are still referenced as a byword for bad behavior. The Vandals became a word for intentional destruction, and the Avars the root for unmitigated greed. Yet the Mongols established an empire that never truly fell, but rather faded away, largely due to internal conflict. Their armies of horse archers proved to be the dominant military force on the battlefield well into the 15th century. Only with the advent of cannon did the horse archer recede in importance. Now, while all these motifs are fitting for the Mongols, it should not be forgotten that the Mongol military was a multifaceted organization. While units of horse archers remained the core component of the Mongols, from the very start, the Mongol military quickly developed other units ranging from heavy cavalry, a corps of engineers, artillerists, and even infantry. And you can see all of them in the picture up there. Initially, many of these were simply auxiliary units, but gradually the Mongols developed what might be called a doctrine of combined arms warfare. One must keep in mind that we're discussing a medieval army and thus an air force is out of the question, although there is a tantalizing rumor that occasionally the Mongols launched giant kites with a scout attached to get an aerial view. As ingenious as that may be, I have yet to find sufficient evidence to confirm it. Now, the development of artillery is not surprising, as it was something that everyone needed in siege warfare. Early Mongol efforts at siege warfare were somewhat desultory and clearly demonstrate the need for more effective siege weapons. At the siege of Zongjing in Xixia in 1209-1210, the Mongols diverted a river to flood the city. It was successful, but in the process, the Mongols also almost drowned themselves. They broke a dam. I suspect the city surrendered not only because of the damage from the flood, but also because they determined the Mongols were crazy enough to try anything. Yet, from their encounters with the Jin Empire, the Mongols gained their own artillerists to build and direct the operation of trebuchets and other siege weapons. These were acquired not only through prisoners, but also active recruitment. Many of these people joined out of disaffection with the Jin Empire, as well as believing that Genghis Khan was simply a better leader. As the Mongol siege ability expanded, so did the possibilities. Field artillery was a rare circumstance in the medieval period. Trebuchets, mangonels, and ballistae were bulky and needed to be assembled, something that swift-moving Mongol columns did not allow. Certainly a siege train followed the Mongols, but camels moved much slower than horses. Still, there were occasional set-piece battles where the Mongols had time to assemble their trebuchets. At the Battle of Mohi, I'm trying to find the later here. There, trigger. Okay, here's the Battle of Mohi, and with the bridge, the Mongols used a rolling barrage from their trebuchets to clear the Hungarians off the mountain, off the bridge. And here we have a couple simple traction trebuchets of Chinese design. Now, elsewhere, other forms of combined arms warfare took place. As the Mongols campaigned against the Jin Empire in northern China, they acquired new units, heavy cavalry, and even infantry. The infantry was primarily used in siege warfare, but the Mongols also developed field units as well. It is often cited that the Mongols had an army of 60% light cavalry and 40% heavy, and their units of 100 and 1,000 reflected this. This information is inaccurate and based on the description of an army in the Liao dynasty, which is then thought that because the Liao were related to the Mongols, they once ruled the Mongols, that the Mongols then simply adopted that. But it's not actually based on contemporary sources. The Mongols did not try to fit non-nomadic units into their existing structure. Rather, they allowed them to remain their own discrete units and continued to fight in the same mode as before. For Genghis Khan, there was no sense in trying to fit square pegs into round holes. Those that could fit in the Mongol, or rather nomadic style of warfare, could do so. But for those who could not, they remained in their standard units, but decimally organized. The key to success, however, was learning how to use them effectively on the battlefield. This came quickly enough. Again, the core of the Mongols remained the nomadic horse archer, but medium and heavy cavalry increased with the acquisition of Khitans and Jurchens. Additionally, the recruitment and creation of armies of Han Chinese infantry became increasingly useful as the Mongols pushed into mountainous areas and terrain of South China in the 1250s. Yet this is not the only region that the Mongols used mixed forces. After the conquest of Armenia and Georgia, the Mongols began using Georgian and Armenian troops. The Georgians quickly became a favorite unit of the Mongols in the West. They participated in various campaigns against Muslim powers, such as the Seljuk Sultanate of Rum, basically what is modern Turkey. If we trust the sources, the Mongol commander Beiju's deployment of the Georgians was crucial to the Mongol victory. These were also deployed at the siege of Baghdad and then again with the invasion of Syria in 1260. It was not unusual for the Mongols to take advantage of rivalries and past grievances among their enemies either. Thus, the use of Christian soldiers, such as Georgians and Armenians, against Muslims, or vice versa, Muslims against Christians, made sense on many levels. Yet the Mongols did not have to depend on religious rivalries alone. In the events leading up to the siege of Baghdad and the resulting destruction of the Abbasid Caliphate in 1258, Caliph Mu'tasim warned Hulagu that all of Islam would rise up against the Mongols and rush to his aid if the Mongols attacked. Imagine his surprise when the armies of numerous Muslim potentates from across Iran joined the Mongols as they marched on Baghdad. These armies brought not only more cavalry, both medium and light, but also infantry and their own siege artillery, including counterweight trebuchets, which are right there, far superior to the traction trebuchets the Mongols had previously used. Now, before the fall of Baghdad, however, the Mongols also dealt with the branch of Shi'ism known as the Nizari Ismailis, more popularly known as the Assassins. No field battles were fought in this campaign. The Ismailis had long learned from the previous century in their dealings with the Seljuk Empire and then later with the Khwarezmian Empire around the late 12th century and early 13th century, that they lacked the ability and the numbers to win on the battlefield. Hence, why they turned so frequently to the assassination of leaders to extend their influence. While the Nizaris had actually been the Mongols' allies in the 1230s, relations between the two turned sour in 1240. After an alleged attempt on the life of the fourth Mongol Khan, Mongke, the Mongols determined they could no longer tolerate the Nizaris' presence, and thus Hulagu was sent by his brother Mongke to deal with them, as well as any other recalcitrant group. The Nizaris, however, had maintained their autonomy, if not independence, through a series of fortresses in the mountains of northern and central Iran. Although some scholars, basically what this meant with the mountains is that Mongol cavalry would not be very effective. So you have to lay siege to these, and of course, mountains would also make that a little bit more difficult in terms of positioning your weapons. Now, to counter this, Hulagu brought 1,000 Chinese engineers. Now, some scholars have interpreted the appearance of the Chinese engineers to mean that the Mongols brought experts in gunpowder weapons. There's no actual evidence to support this. It's all speculation. It did mean, however, that he did bring a few new weapons. While the primary siege weapon, as I indicated, has been a traction trebuchet, access to counterweight trebuchets from the Middle East increasingly rendered the traction trebuchets obsolete. The Chinese, however, did have a balliste, or basically a giant crossbow, like in the picture here, that was far superior than what was used in the West. With its triple bow design, it could launch a missile at a greater range, allegedly over 2 kilometers. Additionally, Hulagu brought some specialists for mountain warfare in the Middle East. In the late 13th century, they were used specifically to deal with Kurdish rebels and bandits. The troops in question were known as the Jedi Chi. They were not Mongols, but also known as Bakrin or Makrin ethnically, and allegedly originate from the Tian Shan Mountains in Uyghurstan. Their identity remains vague, but certainly they were not Mongols nor Uyghurs. They remained a distinct unit well into the 14th century, stationed around Erbil in Iraq today. Another type of specialist the Mongols used was the Jedi Chi, or weather shaman. While shamans were used for divination purposes to determine dates for battles and campaigns, the Mongols also deployed shamans tactically. One tactical use of a shaman was the employment of a Jadachin or specialist who could use Jada stones or rainstones to raise storms of rain, presumably lightning, hail, snow. These storms were then directed against the enemy with variable results. Perhaps the most notable occasion was when Tolui, the fourth son of Genghis Khan, used rainstones during a campaign against the Jin Empire in July of 1231. The sources do not indicate that Tolui used them himself, but rather that they were employed in warfare. So basically, he had a Jedi Chi in his unit, and the Jedi Chi then pull it out. The problem is that not all sources directly mention these individuals. The Islamic sources try to avoid discussion of this. They might obliquely mention reference to individuals like Jedi Chi, but since they viewed it as sort of witchcraft, they don't want to discuss it or bring it to the fore. But we know from other sources that the Jedi Chi in this instance was a Kangli Turk. Because Mongols prior to this did not use rainstones, but Turks did. In this particular instance, Tolui was forced to retreat in the face of a superior Jin army. He planned it to be a feigned retreat, but the Jin followed him so closely and harassed his rear guard that he was running the risk of being encircled as well. So Tolui had his Jedi Chi use his weather magic. And through this, it rained for 3 days behind him, and then snowed on the 4th day behind his retreating troops. But this also would affect his own army since they were so close. However, Tolui took shelter and was able to do so before the blizzard hit in the middle of summer. Furthermore, Tolui has been equipped with raincoats and felt coats to combat the cold. After the blizzard ceased, Tolui then advanced on the bewildered and weakened Jin army and destroyed them. This event is rather significant because yet Jedi Chi were present in other battles, such as when Temujin and Toguro Olkhan fought the Gurkhanid Confederation of Jamuka. The Gurkhanid Jodachin, Buryarok Khan of the Naiman, and Huduka Beki of the Oirat also attempted to raise a storm, but it backfired. It actually knocked the Naiman off the battlefield and into ravines. Apparently, the storm did sufficient damage to the Gurkhanid Confederation forces and their position that the Naiman and Oirat were scattered and did not take any further part in the battle. Now, the Mongol use of shamans was not new, as they were known to have existed in steppe warfare during the Rouran period in the 5th century and perhaps earlier. The Uyghurs also used the Jada stones against Tibetans in 765. But as I indicated before, it was not a Mongol practice. Mongols do not actually appear to use it until they defeated a number of Turkic tribes, most importantly the Naiman in 1204. The Jadachin were also used in Mongol armies across the empire and even after the end of the empire. The use of Jadachin continued long after the Mongols ceased to be primarily shamanistic in faith. John Andrew Boyle noted that a son of the last Mongol Yuan emperor, Togun Timur, used them against the Ming. The stones were used in the Battle of the Mire in Mawarna, or basically was Uzbekistan today, in which Tamerlane was defeated by the Chagatayans of Mongolistan. Jadachin were also employed by Abu Sayyid, a Timurid in 1451. Not in a battle, but rather to produce rain in a desolate area. That's one of the few instances where we know where it was used for, shall we say, a peaceful purpose. Now, what we do see is that the use of the Jada stones became quite prevalent throughout Central Asia after the Mongol Empire, demonstrating once again the cross-cultural importance of the Mongol Empire. We also see an increase in references to uses of Jada stones during the Mongol Empire compared to previous experiences, suggesting an increased use. Now, how effective were these Jadachin? Much like whether modern weathermen hit or miss, many of the accounts indicate the storm backfired and affected the summoning army more so than the intended target. We must keep in mind, however, that many of the accounts are written by Muslims or Confucians who had little tolerance for any aspect of shamanism. For the Muslims, when the stones malfunctioned, it was a demonstration of God's will against pagan activities. Yet the question is, if these were so unpredictable, then why did the Mongols and others continue to use them? Indeed, nomadic armies only ceased to use them after 1510, when the Safavids crushed the Uzbeks at the Battle of Merv. This happens to be when Shah Ismail effectively uses cannons against the Uzbek horse archers, perhaps demonstrating the superiority of gunpowder weapons over storm stones. Now, the Mongol campaigns in the east, however, is where we find a greater emphasis on combined arms warfare. Terrain and weather played a major role in this change. In the steppes, cavalry of all sorts could be used, but the standard Mongol horse archer remained supreme. In the west, Kozidag in 1243 was the last major field battle the Mongols fought until Ainjalut in 1260. Afterwards, the dissolution of the Mongol Empire, battles between the Ilkhanate and the Jochids, or Golden Horde, continued to be dominated by horse archers. In China, as previously mentioned, the Mongols assembled large armies of Chinese infantry. Additionally, they used Khitans and Jurchens as heavy cavalry. As the Mongols penetrated further south, infantry played an increasing role. The mountainous terrain, terraced fields, rice paddies, and the hot and humid weather of South China all limited the effectiveness of Mongol cavalry. Not only did the terrain limit the Mongols' ability to effectively deploy armies of horse archers and thus constrain their mobility, the weather did not agree with the horses. Furthermore, humidity wreaked havoc on Mongol bows. While they still functioned, the humidity penetrated the materials of the composite bow, hindering its effectiveness. Thus, other types of troops were necessary. With manpower of China, infantry was a natural choice. Yet other obstacles were the many rivers of the Song Empire. Without a naval component, the Mongols would be hard-pressed to conquer the Song. During sieges, cities would be continued to be supplied and reinforced by water. Indeed, it was the renegade Song general Lu Zheng who advised the Mongols on developing a riverine navy. While a former Song general advised the Mongols, a Mongol general implemented the riverine navy with great effect. Ajunoyan, the famed grandson of Subedai, implemented the navy in raids and blockades, as well as the occasional naval battle. Aju's tactics were instrumental at the sieges of Zhangyang and Fangcheng. He developed earthworks along the Han River to harry the Song navy. With these, he captured additional ships that he then augmented his own fleet that allowed him to then engage the Song navy. He also used his ships to transport troops up and down the river, often using paddle wheel ships. At the siege of Zhangyang and Fangcheng, Aju's navy broke the floating bridge, which not only blocked the river, but also allowed troops to move back and forth between these two cities, helping them out against the Mongol attackers. With the destruction of the bridge, Fangcheng fell shortly thereafter. Now, at the Battle of Yanglu Fort, at the mouth of the Han River in 1275, Aju's brilliance is amply demonstrated. Keeping half of his ships ready to defend against the Song navy, he used others as landing craft, allowing his infantry to establish a beachhead. His cavalry then landed and cleared the battlefield. With the Song navy and their efforts to hold the riverbank defeated, the Song fortress could now be surrounded. The Song commander, Jiagui, retreated, abandoning Yanglo. His armies then quickly sailed upstream to attack cities they previously bypassed, while also destroying their navy capacity. What Aju does is basically take the Mongol horse warrior and put him on the water. Probably not quite like that, but in ships nonetheless. Other examples of Aju's ingenuity exist as well, such as the naval battle near Jiao Mountain in 1274, where he encountered the Song navy in a floating fortress. These were units of 10 ships chained together. It limited mobility not only for the Song, but also intended to prevent the Mongols from having room to maneuver. The Song commanders Zhang Shijie and Sun Huchen had determined this strategy as an act of desperation in an effort to stop the Mongols. It was also to prevent the Song ships from fleeing, telling you that they didn't trust their own guys. When Aju observed the Song strategy from a vantage point, he quickly assessed the situation and developed a strategy saying, "We can burn them and go." And that is exactly what he did. Combining Mongol steppe tactics with naval warfare, he deployed his navy in 3 large units, a center with 2 wings, much like how the Mongols would deploy their armies on the battlefield. While his ships advanced up the middle, archers on the wings shot fire arrows on the stationary ships. Rather than attempting to break through, the Mongols simply set the floating fortress on fire, and then they continued to go around them and pursue any ships that did manage to break free of their units. This was essentially a steppe strategy applied to water, as the Mongols frequently bypassed fortresses to attack armies. From riverine warfare, the Mongols then advanced to oceanic adventures. The most notable was the invasion of Japan. Their initial attack in 1274 was limited and primarily focused on the destruction of the port of Hakata, which did significant trade with the Song Empire. Although the Mongols largely succeeded in this task, their fleet suffered significant damage from an untimely typhoon. Ships that survived were then vulnerable to Japanese counterattack. While this was a combined arms venture, the second invasion in 1281 is a better example. Now, although the Mongols ultimately failed in their endeavors to conquer Japan, it is an excellent demonstration of the potential of Mongol combined arms warfare. In this endeavor, we have Mongol armies consisting not only of Mongols including cavalry, but also Chinese infantry, Korean and Chinese naval ships, and Marines. If the sources are to believe, the Mongols sailed with 4,400 ships, an effort only surpassed by the D-Day invasion in World War II. Additionally, the Mongols utilized gunpowder bombs launched by trebuchets, which you can see up there. Now, although the invasion of 1281 was stymied not only by a typhoon, but also well-coordinated Japanese defense, it demonstrates the advances in combined arms warfare by the Mongols. Now, finally, we should examine Mongol efforts in Vietnam. In 1282 and 1283, the Mongol general Sogedu received orders from Kublai Khan to invade Champa, which was down here, basically southern Vietnam. He allegedly sailed with 1,000 ships. Vietnam at this time consisted of two kingdoms, Dai Viet in the north and then Champa. Sogedu's invasion thus bypassed Dai Viet. Thus, the Mongols intentionally chose to utilize their fleet for an invasion instead of taking a land route. Sogedu successfully landed and defeating opposing forces in a number of battles. In 1284, 1285, he then joined in a pincer attack on Dai Viet. This invasion, however, ultimately failed. Not only did the Vietnamese put up a stiff resistance, but the invasion seems to have been called off midway. The Northern Army withdrew. Sogedu was left in a lurch. He died in the battle. Nonetheless, we see an impressive use of naval forces that delivered a combined arms force of cavalry and infantry into hostile terrain. Hostile not only in terms of invading, but also in terms of terrain. Jungle and mountains as well as the climate. Nonetheless, the Mongols persevered and successfully conquered Champa and made inroads into Dai Viet. Their hold, however, was ephemeral. The Vietnamese used the same tactics that they used against the Mongols later in the 20th century against the Japanese, the French, and then the Americans. So they learned quite a lot from fighting the Mongols. Now, this leads us to the ever popular question and what-if scenario of what if the Mongols had attempted to conquer Europe. Often cite that mountains and forests would prevent the Mongols from effectively using their cavalry. Another argument is that the Mongols were terrified of the European military, particularly the well-armored knights and infantry using crossbows. In addition, there's been an argument that numerous castles would have stymied the Mongol advance. Finally, the lack of pasture would have prevented the Mongols from having large armies. Now, all of these arguments are quite flawed, however, and largely stem from a sycophantic chroniclers as well as some historians, both amateurs and professionals, enamored with Western medieval warfare. While I have an admittedly ever so slightly pro-Mongol bias, I would make the argument that Europe itself did not pose a problem. It may not have been easy, but the Mongols could have conquered Europe if they had really put forth the effort. Let's look at the evidence. Now, forests and mountains. These have never been a deterrent to Mongol forces. Genghis Khan successfully seized control of the mountain passes that separate the steppes from the Jin Empire. Nor did the Hindu Kush mountains prove an obstacle in Afghanistan to the Mongols, or the mountains in South China, or Mazandaran when the Mongols destroyed the Nizari Ismailis. I would be remiss to point out the Mongol forces operated in the Balkans with little difficulty. Force could slow down the Mongols, but they did not stop them. In 1217 and 1218, the Mongol general Dorbe Dokshin successfully traversed the forests of Siberia to quell a rebellion among the Hoyin Irgun. As all of you know, that means the forest people. Mongol commanders were also successful in the forests and jungles of Southeast Asia, conquering not only territory in modern Yunnan, Vietnam, and Myanmar, but also in defeating armies that used elephants, something that they would not see in Europe. Now, climate was not an issue, at least not in Europe, although recent studies have suggested that weather caused the Mongols to withdraw from Hungary in 1241, and this monocausal reasoning is not convincing. I'm not alone in doubting this. This ties into pasture issues. Certainly too much rain could hamper the Mongol horses, as they most certainly learned in Southeast Asia. However, there were solutions. As demonstrated elsewhere, the Mongols did not rely solely on cavalry. Combined arms forces were used most frequently in regions where terrain was not suitable for large armies of cavalry. There's no reason why the Mongols would not have used combined arms warfare in Europe. Siege engineers were an obvious inclusion, and indeed, they did accompany the Mongols into Hungary and Poland. Infantry would have been appropriate from across the empire as well. Considering that the Mongols used Alans, not people named Alan, but an Iranian ethnic group around the Caucasus, originating from the steppes there, there's little reason to think that they would not have brought infantry from China or elsewhere. Additionally, do not discount the idea of bringing Muslim troops to invade Europe. The Mongols understood psychological warfare and also the idea of using ideological opposites to fight each other. They're masters of finding the disgruntled and making deals. Indeed, it was alleged that the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II was offered a position within the Mongol Empire based on his falconry skills. Considering Frederick's issue with the papacy, where he was usually excommunicated, as well as his own proclivity to make deals, I would wager it was a coin toss if he would side with the Mongols against the Pope in return to be their governor of Europe. He would not be the first to decide service under the Mongols was better than war with them. And let's not forget that every king has recalcitrant vassals too. The lack of unity in Europe offered more opportunities for the Mongols. It would be far easier nut to crack than, say, the Song Empire with its vast resources and manpower. One can argue that the armies of Europe would be more valorous than those of the Song, but we must also keep in mind that the Song fought the Mongols from 1234 to 1279. Could the comparatively much smaller kingdoms of Europe resist for 45 years? The Mongols would have also found allies in Europe as well. In the 1240s, as the Mongols invaded, there was already fear that the Mongols had allies in Europe. Conspiracy theories abounded that the Mongols were the legendary lost tribes of Israel, coming to liberate the Jews from Christian oppression. This was believed by both the Christians and the Jews. Also, there were rumors that the Jews were storing weapons and would help supply the Mongols. While we can't rule this out, it seems unlikely, as the Jews, rather politically unimportant in the 13th century, did not attract much interest from the Mongols in any region. Still, other groups may have existed, from religious dissidents to political factions. Now, there's no doubt that the Mongols respected the military capability of Europe, just as they did with other enemies. But they obviously did not believe it was superior to their method of war. Indeed, although Jean of Plano-Carpini indicate the Mongols were concerned with Western martial prowess, a close reading of his suggestions on how to fight the Mongols indicates he was much more concerned about a Mongol victory than he suggests. He advocated that knights wear 2 layers of chainmail, as one would be insufficient against their arrows. He also insisted on using more crossbows, demonstrating that he grasped the need to increase the firepower of European armies. The Mongols would have been quite content just to sit back and shower their enemies with arrows. One needed to be able to return fire. And as we can see, we have a wide variety of arrowheads to choose from, not just armor-piercing narrow arrows, but ones that can cause gaping wounds, meant to disrupt formations, because you shoot these much larger arrows against poorly armored infantry. You don't have to kill them. You just have to make them bleed a lot. And then no one likes to be next to the guy bleeding all over everyone. You have to pull him back, which means formations start breaking down. There's also a final consideration: leadership. Undoubtedly, many talented leaders existed in medieval European history. That being said, the Mongols produced numerous generals that maintained a high level of quality throughout their history. Furthermore, they did not limit their commanders to one ethnicity, but sought talented leaders throughout the empire. If one died, another could take his place due to their military education system. There's little evidence that any of the European kingdoms could do this on a consistent basis. There's no reason to doubt that the Mongols could have achieved the conquest of Europe. It may not have been easy, but if the Mongols could defeat the armies of the Jin Empire, the Song, the Khwarezmian Empire, all of which could field much larger armies than any kingdom in Europe, why would the Mongols be stopped? And with that, I thank you for your attention and welcome your questions. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Could you tell us a little more about that last point that you made in regards to the military education system and as to why, obviously, Mongolia at that point was considered so successful in producing a variety of very talented leaders?
Yes. The Mongols had a rather unique system of apprenticeships. And we see this where a junior commander is paired with a more senior one to learn the ropes. We see this actually in the lifetime of Chinggis Khan. When he first starts out in the service of Togrul Khan, he is someone who's not received really any military education, if we're to trust the sources. His father dies in his youth, and that would be the normal person who would teach you about warfare. And so after Togrul, Jamuka, and Temujin rescue Borte from the Merkits, Temujin basically stays with Jamuka, and Jamuka is a well-established war leader for Togrul. And so there, it's not just a reunion of these blood brothers, but it's also an opportunity for Temujin to learn how to conduct warfare. And then we see this continuing. Most of his sons don't receive an independent command for a number of years. They're always paired with another general. We see other generals paired with a more senior one. And the Mongol bodyguard, the Keshik, this would also serve as a military school to train people. After 1206, virtually all of the generals in the Mongol military emerge from the Keshik. These are people that the Khan, regardless of who it is, knows personally. He's observed them. He's seen them function in a wide variety of occupations and skills besides just actually being a bodyguard. And so they have experience, and he knows where they're suited to command, what particular skill set they can bring. In Europe, the military training, and really in many other places, it was haphazard. It was, you learn from one person, but it was not institutionalized. It was all going from one person to another person to another person. There wasn't a standardized system like the Mongols had developed. So this meant the Mongols could have a general killed and then the next guy could set up. Napoleon would later devise a system much like this, so that it was said that every soldier carried a marshal's baton in his backpack so that he could assume command. It's the same with the Mongols. If a commander of 10 should be able to command 100, a commander of 100 should easily command 1,000, and so forth.
Was the system of squiredom in Europe though not?
What was that?
The system of having squires, knights?
Yes, that was more to train them as a knight, but not every knight was actually a military commander. Being a commander of a large military unit was a bit different than just your normal knightly training. There was a system of apprenticeship. It was more of how to be a knight, how to be a warrior. And again, it tended to be more moving from one person to another, not from an institutional level. So very hands-off. Again, we do see some trends here and there, but as an entire system, not so much.
And one final follow-up question. When did the system of pairing apprenticeships break down? And when did the Mongols stop producing?
It's a bit difficult to say exactly when and at what point. Because so often in the later part of the empire, they're mainly fighting each other. So we see this kind of, breakdown of, Mongol versus Mongol rather than Mongol against opponents. But I would say in the late 1300s, we're definitely seeing a decline in it. But then again, once you do see quite capable commanders like Tamerlane basically emerging from the remnants of the Mongol Empire, showing that the military itself has not declined. They just need a good commander to make it work. So I would say that definitely about 1370s, I would say there's a definite drop off. But I wouldn't be able to pinpoint it to an exact date. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
So we here at ACMS, we read your book, Mongol Art of War.
Thank you.
Immensely enjoyed it. We featured it on our social channel, etc. And we specifically thought the apprenticeship program of the Keshik with the boards in pitch, Jadachi and everything, it was very interesting. Also the fact that you looked at the Kidang or Liao and Seljuk military manuals to translate. But we're just realizing that this is your earliest book, and you have 2 more books. So my question is, how do your later books differ from the Mongol Art of War? What angle are they from?
Well, the later books are not specifically just on warfare. The other ones are the Mongol Conquest and World History is more about what I call the Chinggis Exchange. Basically the transfer of ideas, technology, going back and forth, and how that worked, how it affected things, and ultimately how it changes world history. The Mongol Empire is basically exactly that, a history of the Mongol Empire from the rise to its end in various places. But because of the particular series it is in with Edinburgh University Press, it also looks at how the Mongol empires start transforming into Islamic empires, depending on where they were, and the process of conversion and things like that. And my latest book, The Mongols, basically focuses on 2 simple questions. Why were the Mongols successful, and why did the Mongol Empire end? So I haven't been able to return to a more focused military study. But what some of the things I've been doing since then have been focusing more on more specific aspects of it, such as Mongol military medicine, dealing with wounds, strategy of conquests or conquest strategies, things like that. And then, of course, aspects like the use of shamans in warfare and fun stuff. But it's a continually evolving process. Yes, ma'am.
What led you to study the Mongol warfare at the beginning?
At the beginning, I was about 10 years old and found a book on Chinggis Khan by the old biographer Harold Lamb in my school library. And I read that, and it really grabbed my attention. And so the Mongols were always on my radar. And then when I was an undergraduate in college as a history major, trying to figure out what I really wanted to study, did I want to study the history of the Mayans, because there was this really cute Guatemalan girl that I knew, or something else. And then I read another book on the Mongols, and so that is what made me say, yes, everything about this makes sense. It just clicked more than anything else. And I grew up in Virginia, and every day was a field trip to historical sites, and so I had no interest in American history. There's no Mongols in it, so why bother?
How attractive it can be. I've been there only 2 months, and I'm so fascinated about this Mongol warfare and the archery and horses. If I had a chance to get this chance like you did at the age of 10, I probably became Mongol.
And that's a great thing about the Mongol Empire, is that it was so large that I remember as an undergraduate, as I wrote my thesis, thinking, oh, I know so much. And now I realize how little I know, and it just feels, I feel like my ignorance is just growing as I realize just how much we don't know about the Mongol Empire.
And also, it's true that all the resources about the Mongol history from Genghis Khan time, what I read was it's kind of fuzzy. They're not sure, because of Chinese roads and these roads and that road. And is it true that it's very hard to grasp the real map?
It is, because we have very few actual Mongolian sources. We have the Secret History of the Mongols, and then there's what's called the Record of the Holy Warrior, but we only have that in a Chinese form. I'm going to try and make sure I get this right, because I don't know Chinese. Xingwu Jing Qin Jinglu. It's in Chinese, but it's very clearly written in a Mongolian idiom. It's not the way a Confucian scholar would have written. So it was probably written in Mongolian and then it was copied, but the Mongolian records have been lost. Parts of it have appeared in other Mongolian chronicles, and then the great Persian chronicler Rashid ad-Din basically copied the whole thing for his own record for different portions. And so most of what we know about the Mongol Empire is based off of, as you mentioned, Chinese sources, Persian sources, Georgian, Japanese, things like that. And you always have to take into account their perspective. They're outsiders, they don't fully understand. And that's often the fun thing about it, is they don't understand what the Mongols are up to, partially because we're talking about sedentary cultures, writing about a nomadic culture that so many of them viewed as barbaric and uncivilized. Meanwhile, the Mongols are looking at these people who live in cities of, why the hell would you want to live in a city instead of being in a nice open area? You're trapped. You're farming. People can just come and attack you at any point. If you're a nomad, you can at least leave. So we do have this cultural disconnect of people writing about the Mongols and then the Mongols ruling people. But it's not quite I remember there's several documentaries coming from the 1980s and 1990s that you have the narrator saying the Mongols destroyed what they did not understand. And that's not quite it. It's not that they didn't understand, they just didn't have a use for it in many cases. Such as like walls. The Mongols typically tore down fortifications. Why? It got in the way of what they wanted to do. And also, the other thing was, why do we need a wall? If someone's going to attack, we're just going to move away. So, we don't need a wall. Yes, sir?
Thank you. You mentioned that there were grain-making techniques that the Mongol armies used.
Yes.
I wondered if the sources mentioned any other dramatic practices that
That is a topic I'm still working on. One of the main things that they used them for was divination, basically to figure out when is a good time to go on for, what's auspicious. And then we have shamans who also serve as not quite doctors in the traditional sense, but they would deal with some afflictions, but not necessarily, like you've been wounded, but other issues that accompanied them. But I think there's more to this as well, but I haven't gotten that far in my research to go into any detail with any certainty. But the use of the weatherstones I find really interesting because, again, with that example of Tolui, the fact that they're using this in July and they're successful, and Tolui just happens to be equipped for snow. What this tells us is that this is probably something that every Mongol army had, was its own personal Jedi Chi to make a storm. Now, we only have a few mentions of it in the sources. So what does this mean? Well, for one, it was probably only noted when it actually happened. but it doesn't mean they weren't trying to get it. And what does it mean if it doesn't work? Well, who knows? I mean, it might have been one of those things where the Jedi Chi could have said, well, the spirits don't want to help us today. Look at our own, weather people. I don't know about the rest of you, but in the United States, it's the only job where you can be so inaccurate and still have a job. And particularly around where I live near Atlanta, they get so excited that, there's going to be a slight sprinkle of rain and they're basically calling for, the end of days. They get really excited, hijack the TVs and stuff like that. So it is something that, if you have knowledge about weather, and so many people become fascinated, whether it's a general or whether, you're just trying to plan a picnic, it is something that I could see how and why they would want to keep a Jedi Chi around, because if they're successful just 1 out of 10 times, that can make a big difference. It's all about the timing. And of course, if it doesn't happen, no one's going to write it down. We don't know. Yes, sir.
Excellent presentation.
Thank you.
I've talked to a couple of Mongol historians, and they talk about the use of shamans as remote viewers. And that's a possibility.
By remote viewers, you mean like seeing what's happening from
Yeah,
afar?
being able to
Yeah.
see what the opponent is up to, where they are, and what their plans are.
That wouldn't surprise me. If you're familiar with the secret history of the Mongols, there is an individual named, I just blanked on his name. I think it's Dorban Mergen, who had a third eye, which basically means that he could see the future. And I believe they said he could see 3 stages. So basically 3 days of travel. So he could see the future 3 days ahead of time. So it wouldn't be surprising if they did try to do something like this. And we see, other cultures trying to do something similar as well. And who wouldn't want to know what the enemy is up to before they get to it? So I would not be surprised by that. Yes, sir.
You briefly mentioned that Mongols were originally kind of from Jews. There was that kind of rumor, and it's quite spread. Can you elaborate on that more?
Okay, I'm sorry, I couldn't quite hear your question.
You briefly mentioned that the Mongols were Jews.
That. Okay, the Mongols were
Can you
Jews.
elaborate
Yes.
more on that?
Okay. Yes. The thing was that when the Mongols first come out into the wider world, no one really knows anything about them, clearly as Ibn al-Athir indicated. And so the Mongols are coming to the West, both in the Islamic world and the Christian world, and their world perspective is biblical. So basically how they view the world is purely based off of what's on the Bible, what's in the Bible, and a few other things like the Alexander romances that were quite popular in, much of Eurasia. But so the Mongols show up, they're different, their writing is quite different. It's not, Europeans are familiar with Arabic, they're familiar with Hebrew, and they see the Mongols and it doesn't quite fit, so they assume it is Hebrew. And they're also trying to explain who these people are. A popular motif in European history to explain the unknown people and where they came from is the lost tribes of Israel. We see this not only with the Mongols, but at one point the Welsh people in the United Kingdom were the lost tribes of Israel. The Pashtuns in Afghanistan are the lost tribes of Israel. There's a legend among the Pashtuns themselves of this. Later, Native Americans will be described as, these must be the lost tribes of Israel. This is where they went, because with the lost tribes of Israel, they disappear from the biblical record. No one knows where they went to, so they're out there someplace. So whenever you find in medieval Europe unknown people, then this must be them. They're suddenly coming back. The Mongols probably had no idea this is going on, or if they did, they're going to play along with it for one reason. But the thing that I find most interesting about it is not only do the Christians have this idea, oh, they're coming to basically punish us for the way we treated Jews, the Jewish population in much of Europe also views it as they're coming to liberate us. So they start buying into it. But the weird thing is that instead of the Christians then saying, oh, maybe we should not be so mean to the Jewish population, they actually start pogroms and oppressing them again. So it's a weird cycle of violence. But historically, the Mongols are known for having a history of religious tolerance, but it's probably more of religious indifference. As long as your God, your priests pray for our rulers and don't cause any trouble, don't try to force your religion on other people to cause trouble, we're good with it. But most of the favor they showed to different religions was based also on their importance, political importance, population numbers. Jews, Manichaeans, Zoroastrians, and other somewhat smaller populations that did not have any political significance did not get the same attention. They weren't oppressed, but they didn't get the favors that Buddhism, Muslims, and various Christian groups also got, and well, also Taoists. So, anything else? Yes, sir.
Since you're studying about Mongols since you were 10, so
Off and on.
yeah, okay. And Mongolia established the biggest empire, land empire in the history, and it collapsed after 150, 200 years. And we had a lot of up and down since Mongol Empire. So what is your advice to us, the Mongolians now, after we're studying about the Mongol Empire and the Mongols?
Well, so Gala wants to reestablish the Mongol Empire. Well, I have to say that when the United States started the global war on terror, it was looking for the coalition of the willing, and Mongolia stepped up and provided troops. I don't know about anyone else, but I was highly amused that Mongols were back in Afghanistan and Iraq, places that they had invaded 800 years ago. What many people, well, probably most of you, since you live in Mongolia, you're aware of, there are actually Mongols in southern Sudan, where the Mongol Empire never reached. So I think the best advice is to don't get involved in stupid political games like the United States and China and Russia does. Yes, ma'am.
This may be a stupid question, but it's just mind-boggling that Mongolians went to different countries fighting, but there must be some kind of preparation studying that, and just speaking the language and different things. Do they send people, generals or whoever, to learn about the country they want to invade and anything like that?
They did.
Housekeeping stuff.
They did have spies. They did have people gathering intelligence, both directly and indirectly. For instance, the Mongol invasion of Central Asia was started because the ruler of the Khwarezmian Empire there massacred a Mongol caravan, allegedly because they were spies. Now, were they? Maybe, maybe not, but merchants were always a great source of information because they went places, they saw things. And so even if they weren't actually spies, careful questioning you could get a lot of information from them about what is going on. But the great thing about it is that the ruler of the Khwarezmian Empire had used merchants as spies as well. And in fact, one of the merchants he sent to find out about the Mongols and the Jin Empire, because actually he was planning on invading the Jin Empire, one of the merchants he sent actually became a guy who worked for the Mongols, and he may have become a double agent, posing as a spy for the Khwarezmian Empire while actually working for Genghis Khan. But the Mongols also did other things to prepare. They had contacts with other people, other societies. Genghis Khan lived in the Jin Empire for about 10 years. We don't know exactly what he was doing, but he was familiar with it. So when he decided to invade, it was not like he was going to a place that was completely unknown. There had been trade contacts before. He had had a military relationship with the Jin Empire before, so he was familiar with them. The nomads of Mongolia were familiar with Shisha. They were familiar with Karakite out in what is now Kazakhstan as well. So it was not unknown. And the Mongols would ask people, they would try to gain as much intelligence before they would ever invade a place. Yes, sir.
First of all, thanks for this nice speech.
Thank you.
And my question is, when we come to one place, it's like Mongolians, and we always leave soldiers, like one, for example, like 500 or 1,000.
Mhm.
But those sea soldiers, do you have like any culture? Always like stay these places until they die, or they always like move this, or they go back to home or something?
Okay, there are different units of Mongols. The main Mongol army would go, they would conquer, and then they'd go back home to wherever their pastures were. But there were also certain Mongol units known as Tama that would be sent to a location and they would stay there forever, unless they were then ordered to move to another place. An example is in Afghanistan. The Hazara people there are thought to be descended from the Mongol units that were stationed in Afghanistan. And the Mongols sent troops into Afghanistan. They conquered it in the 1220s, but then they withdrew. They did not leave any troops there. But then they invaded again in 1230. And they left, they sent one commander with about 20,000 troops there. Another commander named Tormakan invaded Iran and then eventually settled in what is Azerbaijan. Now, both of these commanders were in charge of a Tama unit. These were typically units that were stationed on the frontier of the Mongol Empire, or originally when they were created on the frontier of the steppe and the Son, basically steppe and sedentary people. But these are units that were set to live in a place permanently. That was actually part of the orders given. You would go, you're going to stay. And what is notable about these is that the commanders were never a Chinggisid prince or someone related to the Mongol ruler. It was always simply a military commander. Now, the one in Afghanistan became, over time, increasingly independent. But we see these Tama units being stationed at different points and staying wherever they are. But the other Mongol units, they might, like with the invasion of Europe, they would go, but then they would go back, and some of them would stay, if they were part of the Jochids, they would stay in the Jochid territory. Other units, because they were pulled up from other princely domains, they would go back to those domains. So it depended on what type of army they were part of. Anyone else?
No, there's a few people hesitating. If there are no other questions, we'll go ahead and end there. Thank you so much.
Thank you.